Did you know that the nutritional needs of your backyard chicken flock change throughout the seasons? Today we're going to look at how you can provide the right nutrition for your flock throughout the entire year. If you're looking for information on a specific season, you can have a look at the chapters and go right to the spot you're looking for. Why do nutritional needs change throughout the year? Well, chickens are natural creatures and they are heavily tied into the natural cycle of the seasons for all the different phases of the year. So things like temperature, whether it is very cold or very hot, will change what your chickens need. The temperature influences your chicken's metabolic rate, and things like it being very cold will increase the amount of energy that they need for keeping warm. And if it's very hot, wow, your chickens might be drinking a lot more water and maybe consuming less feed overall. When your hens are laying lots of eggs, when they're in a reproduction cycle, they need extra protein and calcium and potentially extra energies to sustain their egg laying. And when your flock are molting, their protein requirement increases and the energy that they're going to get from their diet is being diverted into growth of feathers rather than laying eggs. Most of these processes are influenced by day length. So unless you happen to live really close to the equator, you're going to have day length changes throughout the year, and that is going to trigger chickens to go into different phases, which does trigger them to have different nutritional requirements. So if you are just feeding the same feed from the same bag all year round, you might not be providing optimal nutrition for your flock. I'm going to go over each season and the nutritional requirements for that season, and we're going to start with spring because I'm in spring right now. Spring is a time of increased activity. Everything's sort of waking up from its winter slumber. I'm here near the beehive and the bees are absolutely embracing springtime. They are super active at the moment. And your chicken flock is no different. They are going to be moving into their reproductive phase. And what I mean by that is they're going to be laying lots of eggs because the hens don't know, it doesn't matter to them whether those eggs are going to become chicks or not. They're just going to lay them, that's their reproduction, and they're going to have extra requirements for energy and protein as they are in the springtime. Your chicken flock in general is going to be increasing their activity levels, so they're going to want to eat more feed. And this is the time of year that a good quality layer feed is a great choice because it is going to be meeting the requirements that they have at this point of the year. You may want to give them a bit of extra protein, ideally complete protein from an animal source. So that is something like fish meal, insect meal, meat and bone meal, or blood and bone meal, just to increase the protein so that they can get laying those wonderful eggs. Complete proteins have all the amino acids that your chickens need to build their bodies and lay great eggs. And if you're going to be breeding chickens, you want those eggs to be the absolute best that they can be. The other thing that starts to happen in the springtime is an increase in green forage for your flock. And that can really help to pump up their nutrition, especially as they come out of the winter time where they might have started to get a little bit depleted of some vitamins and minerals due to the lack of fresh forage over the winter time. So this can be a really great way if you can let your chickens out to forage or if you can bring forage to them to really help to offset the feed that you're going to have to buy from the store for them, because it can have a really great level of protein and really rich in vitamins and minerals, which is going to really help with the health of your flock and the quality of the eggs that they can lay. If your flock has access to high quality forage where they can go out and pick for themselves, it can really help to offset your feed costs, especially in any extra protein you might be adding to their diet, because they're going to be able to find lots of insects and things like that that will be complete proteins for them on their own, and you won't have to add that in yourself. So if that is an option for you, springtime is a great opportunity to really let your flock go to town on on getting a lot of their food for themselves. So to boil down my tips for springtime feeding, you want to start increasing the feed quantity that you're offering your chickens as the daylight starts to lengthen, and you want to make sure you're hitting a really good protein percentage either from the bag feed or from adding in extra protein. Springtime is also a great time to deworm your flock as everything starts to wake up again, so do parasite cycles. So a great time to get on top of that, because a chicken with a high parasite load is not going to be as efficient at converting their feed into feathers and their body and eggs for you. And it's also really important to remember to provide a separate source of calcium for your hens to choose from as they wish, as we're moving into the higher production time of the year. So make sure you've got a little dish or some kind of accessible area for them to get their extra calcium from. Now we move into the summertime. Now summer is all about managing heat stress because chickens are much more susceptible to heat than they are to cold. They don't really cope with the heat very well, probably because they're covered in fluffy feathers that are great for insulating against the cold. Now, when your chickens are under heat stress, they're going to lay less and they're going to eat less. So it's about managing the food that you're giving them so that they can get the calories and the protein that they need, even if they're consuming less feed overall. A strategy for increasing the nutritional density of the feed that your chickens are getting is to add in extra protein and to feed really highly digestible grains like corn, which are very high in energy and relatively low in fiber. So if you sort of play around with the ratios that you're feeding, you can still keep feeding a base of a good layer pellet or some kind of layer feed, but then you can add in some corn and you can add in some extra protein. So that's again like fish meal or just any kind of complete protein, animal based, will help your chickens be able to eat less food overall, but still be getting the protein and the energy that they need from their diet. They're going to be drinking a lot more water. So it's really important to keep water in the shade, try and keep it fresh and try and keep it cool to encourage them to keep drinking so that they stay happy and healthy under high heat conditions. Of course, summers are different in different places. Some places have very humid summers, some places have dry summers, some places the summers aren't that hot at all. So you need to think about the actual climate that you're in. In my climate, it doesn't get ridiculously hot, but it does get very humid, and that can become quite stressful for my flock to be able to dissipate heat under high humidity conditions. So providing deep shade for your chicken flock, making sure their food and water are in the shade and they don't have to move through very bright, hot places to access their food and water are great strategies for keeping them hydrated and well fed in the hot months. And you can give them foods like melons and cucumbers, foods that are high in moisture and kind of cooling. You can freeze those foods for them as well, or generally freeze forages and fruits and vegetables to keep the food cooler for them throughout the day, and that encourages them to keep their fluid and food intake up under hot conditions. With all that extra water your chickens are hopefully consuming through the summer heat, you may find that their poop gets a bit runnier just because they're taking in so much more fluid. That's not concerning, but do keep an eye on it so that it doesn't turn into something that's absolutely sort of crazy, but it is normal for poop to get a little bit runnier over the summer when they're consuming lots of water. If their laying drops off because the heat stress is too much, you can look at decreasing the amount of protein that you're feeding, because too much protein in a diet can actually be harmful. It can be metabolically quite difficult for the chicken to break down and shed the excess protein if they're not using that protein up from activity and from laying eggs. So if your flock is just hanging out, not moving at all, and not laying very much, then do decrease the protein level in their feed a little bit until they start laying and moving a bit more. Now we move into the autumn time. Now this is the time of year that chickens usually begin their molt. Hopefully, if their laying has dropped off over the summer, you get a period of time before they start molting where they start laying eggs for you again. But autumn is really about supporting them through their molt, and I've got a video all about molting, so you can check that out for more specifics. But what we're going to want to do for our flock through the autumn time is to make sure that they are getting enough complete protein, so they have the amino acids that they need to completely regrow all of their feathers, which is a very protein and energy intensive sort of period of time for them. You may or may not need to feed them more in total. Just keep an eye on their health and their happiness and their condition throughout this time, because they tend to eat a little less while they're molting, so you can use your same strategy for increasing the density of your chicken feed with a little bit of corn for highly digestible energy and extra protein to balance out the fact that they might be decreasing their food intake. But once they start molting, they're probably not laying eggs. So you may find that it's totally fine to just keep feeding them their regular amount of feed with the same protein percentage and energy, and because they're redirecting that extra protein and energy to their feathers and not to egg production. If you live somewhere where the winters are quite cold or long, this is a great time to really make sure that your flock is going to enter winter at their absolute peak health so they can make it through the challenging times ahead. They might want to have a little bit of extra fat in their diet to help them really build a body condition. And you can do this by just putting a tablespoon of a cold pressed oil mixed in with their feed. Or you can feed them pumpkins and squash with the seeds in it, which is a great natural way for them to get both highly digestible energy from the flesh of those things and to eat the seeds, which are going to be packed full of really healthy fats and oils that they can use to build up their fat-soluble vitamin reserves and to generally get a higher energy content into their diet. And of course, autumn is the time that all of these crops start to become available. They're being harvested. If you've got Halloween in your country, you can grab all of those extra pumpkins and just feed them to your chickens. It's a really great source of good building up food for facing the cold months ahead. The autumn is also a really good time to do another deworming and deparasite in general of your flock, so they are at their peak health running into the colder months. Now, something you can do through the autumn is, as the grass and the forages are sort of doing their final flush, they're recovering from the summer heat and growing well before the cold really hits, is you can gather up that forage and either dry it to give to your chickens later, sort of like hay, or you can turn it into a silage, which I do have a video about doing that as well. And that's a great way to capture the nutrients and energy and proteins available in the general landscape to give it to your chickens in the wintertime when forages like that might be less available. Now we have arrived at winter time. Now, winters can be highly variable depending on where you live in the world. And the colder your winter gets, the more attention and preparation you'll need to put into correct feeding for your flock. And the milder your winter is, the less you're going to have to focus on it as an issue. If you live somewhere where the winters are quite cold, then your flock is going to have an increased calorie requirement to help them keep warm. When you're trying to keep warm, you burn more calories, and that could be 10 to 15% higher to keep the chickens warm. But if they're not laying eggs over the winter, then you may find that their actual feed requirement doesn't increase. It might be more like a summertime or a springtime amount of feed that you need to be offering. So it is really about observing your flock and their body condition and their happiness to see if you're feeding them enough food overall. Adding in seeds and nuts, things like sunflower seeds or flaxseed meal, into your chicken's diet over the winter is a great way to provide a calorie bump of highly digestible fats to help your chickens keep warm without increasing the amount of feed you're feeding overall. So that's a really good strategy. If you have saved some forage, you can feed that out to your chickens, whether you've made silage or you've saved something down as sort of a dry hay type thing. You can feed that to help keep nutrient levels up in your flock as they face those cold winter days. If you're not able to provide stored forage to your flock, you can do things like sprouting some grains, whether you can do that indoors or you have somewhere that it's not so cold that the grains won't sprout. You can go ahead and sprout some grain. It doesn't have to be their entire diet, just a small percentage. So you're giving them some fresh foods that have more vitamin availability than just a bagged feed or dry grain would have for them. And if you've got pumpkins and squashes that you've been able to store through the winter time, you can feed those out. So you're still providing fresh foods and a range of vitamins and minerals to your flock through this time where it's not that available in the environment, or it might be too cold and snowy or rainy or muddy for your chickens to be able to go out and forage enough in the first place. Something that is important to consider if you're in a particularly northern climate where the day length is short and the sun is not very intense is vitamin D. Now, vitamin D is an absolutely essential thing to have in, well, our diets and our chickens' diets to keep us healthy and to be able to, for the chickens in particular, to be able to lay healthy eggs that are capable of producing healthy chicks come springtime. Now, vitamin D wasn't discovered until the early 20th century. And until that point, people didn't really know why their chickens were not doing so well over the winter and coming out in the spring not that healthy and not being able to raise really strong early spring chicks. So once we discovered that, it was easy to be able to provide a vitamin D supplement for flocks that needed it if they were stuck indoors for a long time, not getting a lot of time outside, or just the very fact that the sun in northern climates is not that intense and might not be providing enough, even if the chickens were getting lots of exposure to being outside. If you live in a climate where the winters are long, or you're particularly in a northern climate where the day length is very short, then I would recommend you look at supplementing your chicken flock with vitamin D over the winter. Now, I tried to dive into specifics of dosing and all of that, but it is so highly variable, and it is not something that I need to do here in New Zealand where the sun shines a lot all year round. So I don't need to supplement vitamin D to my flock in the wintertime. So I haven't had to do it. So I don't have specific dosing information for you because it's going to depend on how many chickens you have and how dark and cold your winters are. So I would recommend using cod liver oil or a good quality oily fish oil to supplement your flock with, and have a look at what you can find for dosing. You want to be careful not to overdose. So something like a teaspoonful mixed into your flock's feed once a week is probably a good place to start, again, depending on how many birds are in your flock. I like to recommend supplements from natural sources because I believe that they have factors within them when they're coming from a whole complete food source that we can't emulate in an extracted out, more synthetic kind of supplement. So I would recommend giving your chickens cod liver oil or just liver in general, things like that, to be able to boost up those fat-soluble vitamins that they need over the winter time. A good tip for keeping your flock warm overnight in the winter is to give them a little meal of scratch grains right before they're going to go to bed, so they have a full crop and they're going to be digesting overnight, which is going to provide them with some metabolic heat to help keep them warm. And of course, always remember water. Fresh water that isn't frozen is really important. So you may have to look into some kind of heating system if your water is going to freeze outside, or maybe moving the water into the coop if you have a spot that it can be where it's not going to get really grotty. So have a think about these factors before winter comes to make sure you've got all your bases covered. chicken nutritional needs follow natural cycles, just like the cycles that your chickens flow through during the year, whether they're broody or molting or in peak spring laying. They are natural creatures, and their requirements change throughout the year because things change throughout the year. It's important to observe your flock throughout the year, to look at their behavior, their mood, and their general happiness and body condition, so you can adjust your feeding strategy accordingly. It may not be possible or optimal to just keep feeding the same thing day in, day out across the whole year. Really practice your observational skills so that you can change what you're doing to better meet the needs of your flock. A lot of crops that are brilliant for chickens can be grown in your own garden really easily. Things like summer squash and winter squash and forage greens, and they're ready right when your chicken flock needs them. Things like pumpkin and winter squash are ready right when your chickens need to build up their reserves for going into the winter. Nature has this figured out, and chickens are a great way to help us relearn how to integrate this traditional knowledge and traditional skills back into our everyday lives.